Hello, everybody. How do you feel about your health? Do you feel you have good health, good living habits, eating habits? Imagine this. You're leading a business where people are counting on you and your health starts to fail. What would you do? You're about to meet Sherra Aguirre, and this happened to her. Sherra is a former CEO of a facilities company who used her leadership know-how to learn about how to live a healthy lifestyle and change her way of eating. She then parlayed her knowledge into an award-winning book on veganism. Her passion on the topic led her to partner with a community center to spread the word among African American communities. Here's Sherra. Hello, Sherra. I am so delighted for you to be here and to join us talking about your book, your community initiatives, your background, and so forth. For everybody, I've just given an intro with Sherra's official credentials. What I'm going to tell you is how we met. We met umpteen years ago at a health club. She was walking around and I was lifting weights, and she walked around maybe the third time, and I said, I like her. So I walked up and started walking around with her, and we've been friends ever since. And that was many
That is true.
Right?
Yes, that is true.
Many moons ago.
Yes.
What's significant about this is that this was a health club, and Sherra is now heavily into healthy living, healthy lifestyles. So let's start off at the beginning. Let's start off with your background. How did you grow up? The question I'm asking you broadly is how we got from there to here. Okay, that's where we're going. So talk about growing up, how healthy lifestyles fit into your everyday environment, or did they? Talk about race, since this podcast is focused on diversity, inclusion, and equity. Talk about your racial background. So anything about your childhood that shaped you to be who you are now.
Okay. Well, I grew up in East Texas, and my parents were teachers. Actually, my mom and dad were both teachers, and then we ended up moving to South Texas. But the thing that really shaped, I think, this part of my life in terms of the activities that we're talking about now with health and wellness is that I grew up seeing just so much heart disease, and what came with that, of course, were strokes, aneurysms, heart attacks, people who died in my family when they were very young from heart disease. And this was on both sides of my family. And so as I got older, actually in my, I would say mid to late 20s, having seen that all my life, it started happening to younger and younger members of my family. And so I just, I thought maybe it's our genes, maybe it's our DNA, the family history is so full of this. But I started reading, and I was very curious to know if there was anything that could be done about that. Still thinking that it's, probably genetic or something. But then I started reading more, and this has been a long time ago. We're talking about 40 years ago. So people weren't really talking about food and health and lifestyles. Yes. And so basically I just started reading, but I also started paying a lot of attention to my body, to how I felt. For one thing, I'm one of these people that I'm an anticipator. And so I was about to turn 30 and I was freaking out, and I'm thinking, well, I'm getting old. I better pay attention.
Every decade, it feels like it's old.
Yeah, 30s, that 30 sounded real old. And but anyway, so little by little, I started learning more about some basic things about food and nutrition. I started looking back at the way that our family ate, and I could see that, okay, well, this may not be all genetics. So I started little by little making small changes in my diet. I cut out fried food. That was, I think, I knew that was not good. I couldn't find any other answer. I couldn't see another path because my parents were educated, and they thought they were following the doctor's orders, and nobody was talking about the food. It was pretty much you ate what you ate, and then you got the meds, and that's how you lived. But I didn't quite buy that. I don't know why I didn't buy that.
Yeah.
I can't really explain it.
But did you connect it right now? You connect food and what's happening with food and communities with full of ill health with inequity.
Right.
You didn't then.
Not initially the food. Now, I was actually involved in the Black Power movement at that time, in community organizing at that time, as a student activist. So I certainly knew about health disparities, but I didn't know a lot about the connection of food and health disparities. I knew about income levels, creating those, being a factor. I knew about living conditions, in our communities being a factor. Um, I knew that access to good health care was a factor. The food, I really didn't understand at that point. And really, the fast food environment back then was pretty much accepted.
Right. So now, so you didn't, so you were an activist, so you knew about inequities and the societal inequities, and
Right.
but your personal wellness was off on the side over here, and the two
Yeah,
connected.
yeah,
So
yeah. It kind of was.
mark
Yeah.
us to the connection.
Well, I mean, it happened over, decades, really. It was a slow process because um, from that point, my life trajectory took a turn. And once I graduated, from college, and actually I went back and did a master's program in Actually, I did the master's program in basically education. My parents were educators, but I did that because there were funds available to go back to school. There was a grant, and it wasn't like I really wanted to be an educator, but there was some money, and so I left after I graduated from U of H. So I started thinking about my next steps, and I actually went and got a real estate broker's license. I said, well, I've always liked real estate. My family liked land. Let me try that. So I did that while I was still working at the school district. And actually, I met my an ex-husband there who had this idea to start a company, a facility services, a janitorial company. And I said, well, I thought that sounds interesting. And so we did that. We started this small company. And this was, 1981 or so. And so he kept his job. We had between us, we had 3 or 4 jobs. I was still working for the school district. He was still working for the school district. He also worked for a major facility maintenance company, which is how he got his knowledge and introduction into the industry. He was selling saltillo tile from Mexico, and I was doing real estate at the same time. We had all this
Y'all
going.
were hustling.
Yeah, we were hustling. And so basically, I really wasn't that interested in the janitorial part of it. The real estate sounded more interesting to me, but we got a couple of small contracts with friends. One of our friends had a construction company, so we got a contract with his firm. And it kind of started to grow. And I thought, I better pay attention to this. And maybe there's something to this. And so eventually I actually quit my job first to go full time with the company. And basically it was operated from a kitchen table. We didn't really have an actual office. But because my ex was working for a large, national, actually international firm, he kind of knew, the operation side of the business. So I focused on the marketing side of the business and kind of the back office stuff. And it grew. It started growing. And I said, wow. And I remember it took, I think it was like 6 months before I could pay myself anything. And when I cashed that first check, I don't have it now, but I took that dollar and I put it in a frame and I hung it over my kitchen table. I took $1 out of what I made, just symbolically, because it took so long. But it started to grow, and it really grew faster after after our divorce. We actually divorced, and we split the company, and that was a tough time because it was about the same time that Houston was in Texas. The country was in a recession, in 81, the early 80s. And then we started, and the recession kind of caught us by surprise. We weren't savvy business people in that respect. I had never had a business class, basically, and nor had he. But we were able to grow the business to a decent size. I think we were doing maybe 3 million in sales or something, which was not bad,
Wonderful.
Yeah. And so when we divorced, it was tough, but we came up with an agreement to split the company. And so we split it according to the debt. I took the larger part of the debt, but I also took the larger part of the company, the client base, and he took part of it. And so that's how we split. But I was terrified, Jean, because I was thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Because I didn't really know the operation side of it that well. I knew the sales and marketing, but one of my saving graces was I always had a fairly good sense of what I didn't know. If I didn't know something, my only saving grace was that I knew I didn't know it, and I knew I needed to find somebody that did. So
Okay,
I was
so
able to build.
I'm just listening to you thinking, I don't even know how to ask this question. How did you keep going through all of that uncertainty and all of that new learning? This is why I wanted you here. I've seen you do this
there were so
again and again. I've seen you do it.
Yeah, that was really tough, because I I had lots of sleepless nights. And then to make it worse, Jean, this was you remember the banking crisis
Yes.
that followed, the whole recession. And so my bank went under,
Oh,
and they called my note got called. And I mean, just out of nowhere. I'd never been through a bankruptcy for a bank before, but lots of banks were failing. And so sleepless nights. But what I was able to do was I had developed a relationship with my banker, a small independent bank here in town that was bought by another bank, years ago. But that banker, the president of that small bank, and I, somehow we formed a connection. And this was, a white guy, very conservative in his banking business. I picked up on that, and I learned from that. And I just he really got me through that.
So when you say learn from that, be real, can you be concrete? I know it was a while ago, but
so what I learned was I learned what it would take financially to build or develop good banking relationships. And so I understood the credit part, the character part, the collateral part. I learned that from him because he wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, I couldn't come in there with something. I mean, the relationship was not that I could come in, with half of what I needed, right? So, but part of I think my upbringing, Gene, is that we were taught that because we were African American, we had to be twice as good.
Oh, yes.
That's what they told me. I mean,
Yep.
they told me, and then being a woman on top of that, and in a male-dominated business, I probably need to be 2 times plus a little bit more, whatever I could do. And of course, I couldn't do it all, but that meant I had to build a good team. So I built a good team over time. Um, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I brought in people that were the wrong people, or I brought in right people that were in the wrong position. I learned all of that. I went back and got some education through Houston Minority Supply Development Council. I was able to get a couple of scholarships, and I did some study on business, the marketing, the financial part. So I took advantage of whatever educational opportunities that I could either afford, or that I could, apply for a grant or somehow get a sponsor, to kind of learn how to make it, because I really didn't know. At the time, I ended up with 2/3 of a $3 million company. I really didn't know all that.
Okay, so here's what I'm hearing so far. Because I remember we had lunch more frequently then when you were involved with the minority business folks, and you said
Right.
it's through them that you learned how to develop your business. So what
Yes.
I'm fascinated by is, first of all, you had the stamina. You had stamina to keep going through a divorce, through picking up on a business that you only partly understood,
Yeah. And through a recession at the same
and
time.
through a recession.
Yeah.
So you had the stamina to keep going, and through sleepless nights. Let's add that.
Oh my God. Yeah. Some days I would describe myself as, you ever heard the term dead man walking?
Uh-huh.
That's how I felt a lot of days, because I couldn't see how I was going to get out of it. I didn't see how I was going to deal with the recession. And the bank failure was huge, because I can't remember the amount of debt I had at that time. It was probably, I don't know, $300,000 or $400,000 or something. I'm not sure. I didn't have the cash. I was paying the note, but they called the note. So that meant the full amount was due.
So many times I meet people, or I talk to people who give up with the slightest thing in their way, or even a big thing, but they have just flat decided they're not good enough, or they've decided it's not in the cards for them, or they decided I can't do it. And you had ample reason to decide you couldn't do it. Let me go back to HISD and become a teacher, do my research or what have you. You had ample reason and a viable alternative of what to do, and still you kept going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I've always been a little bit adventurous. I think that helps. I think my parents helped me a lot. I think about, I was really close to my mom, and not quite as close to my dad, but as I've gotten older, I realized my dad had a huge influence on me. He wanted a son. He got me. I was an only child. In fact, he told a couple of relatives I was a boy when I was born. They didn't find out. I remember I was 12 years old and somebody got sick, and I went to the hospital, along with my parents, and they say, "Whose child are you?" Because they hadn't been in touch with, they were like a distant relative. I told them who I was. They said, "That what?" He told me he had a boy.
Okay, so you were only child, so that helps round out the picture. You were only child, you were a surrogate son, basically, right?
Yeah, because he bought me boys' toys. I had a train, I had Davy Crockett uniform and a pistol.
Okay, so there we go. Okay, so you were raised to be adventurous to have the aggression of a male child. The
Yes, and
go
I
get it.
tell, yes, I tell you what my dad did specifically that I will forever be grateful for. I didn't realize this until really I probably started thinking about it the last 20 years or so. But what he would do, he was a educator, and we were living at the time in East Texas. This was before we relocated, and he became a principal in South Texas. And he was also a county agent, so he would go to the farmers and the cattle people, the ones of color, because they segregated,
Yes, sure.
the services. So white farmers and cattlemen didn't have black county agents telling them what to do. So that was not appropriate at that time. So what he would do is when he went to see the black farmers and ranchers in East Texas, he would take me with him as a little kid. I have this photograph of me with a little cowboy hat and boots on. And so I would go with him. And my dad was a bit of a show off. And so he would teach me these names of these diseases that were common, for cattle. And I had no idea what it was, right? But he taught me the name, and he taught me what he looked for that went with this particular disease or that. So the show off part that he enjoyed is carry me along when he went, and he would say, I see this cow has this, and I see this is going on. Sherra, what do you think? What do you think this is? And I would rattle off this scientific name that I really didn't understand, but I knew it was associated with what he told me that he would look for.
Oh, so blew everybody away.
Well, here was the thing though. What I didn't realize until way later in life is that the impact of being the smallest person in the group, a female among men in a group, the youngest person in a group, but the one with the answers.
All right, there we go.
But I didn't know this. This came later in life, but reflecting, over my life, I can see where, some of the adventurous side of me comes from.
Yeah, see, in today's young people, and by young people, I mean 20s, 30s,
yeah,
many were not raised to face adversity or raised to be smart. They were raised in a competitive environment where everybody's smart around them, and so people grow up thinking they don't have it because everywhere they go,
okay,
somebody is smarter or pretty or faster or whatever. What you're describing is a childhood where you could step out and shine.
mm-hmm. And my dad did that for me, and I appreciate it. But that was still within the context of Black America.
Well, that's
Because
what I'm thinking. I'm
yeah,
wondering, okay, you have these educated parents, these teachers, but you're
mhm,
also in a segregated society. So
right,
what were
right.
you taught about what it means to be in a segregated society?
Well, I just, I mentioned earlier that you had to work harder.
Right.
You had to try twice as hard. Um, that you always had to prove yourself. So those were the things that I was taught. But I tell you, the second, I think, thing that probably helped me with my confidence and adventurism is that I decided to go to the University of Texas when I graduated high school. And basically, most of my family had gone to historically Black schools. But I had a little scholarship because I finished, I think second, first, maybe top of the class. I think I did a valedictory speech. So, but when I got there, I was terrified because I had never been around white people, really, other than in my little small town, because we had moved to Edna, Texas, in South Texas, and very small town, segregated town. except that the Hispanics lived on the same side as the Black people. But we didn't really mix or mingle. So here I was. I remember going into this chemistry class. There were more people in the class at the University of Texas as a freshman in that chemistry class than there were in my whole high school. I mean, I'm like, and these are white kids. And see, I really didn't know. I just didn't know if I could compete. I mean, the whole racism is so insidious that even when you think, I mean, I always thought I was pretty smart. I made great grades, but it was in a Black environment. I didn't know if that would translate into a white environment. So what I did was I did basically what I was taught to do. I worked my butt off to the point where I'm thinking, damn, you know. Then I got angry because I started getting angry because I realized that the racial divide and the way that Black people were characterized as being less than was complete trash. It was this bullshit. And when I realized that, I got really angry. And this was in the 60s. This was in the mid 60s. So the Black Power movement was, really civil rights and Black Power movements. The anti-Vietnamese War was part of the landscape.
Sure.
So I just really started thinking something has to be done about this. This is something has to be done about this. I can't just fit into. I just got angry. I felt like I had been duped.
We had been duped.
But I didn't know it until I was in this bubble. I was in this, bubble of people like me, and I didn't know.
So when you got angry, what did you do with it?
I joined a Black Power group on campus, one of the campus groups, and I was one of the people who helped found it, actually.
So I want to jump from that moment in college when you realize you're due, and the fact that as a young entrepreneur, when the world is crashing around and the bank failure is happening, and you're a recent divorcee or in the process of it, you've managed to win over a white conservative banker.
I know. It's the craziest thing. And I think of him to this day. And
okay, I have clients now who tell me that their white so-and-so is prejudiced, right? I'm listening to you, growing up in segregation, realizing you've been duped, and a decade maybe later, you're winning over this white conservative banker.
It was more like 2 decades. It was in my 30s.
Okay, so two decades then. That's cool.
Yeah.
What happened? How could you do what self-talk did you have to give yourself that you could go from here, anger, do blah blah blah, to talking with credibility to this white conservative banker?
I was angry when I realized that I was duped. And I was angry at the system, really. I was angry at, the politicians, the educators who allowed this to be taught in schools. One of the first classes I had at UT was a philosophy class because I never knew what I wanted to be. I've always been this person who I like this, I like that. I was kind of good at a lot of things, not an expert in anything. So philosophy was really interesting to me. So I took this class and I was in the class, and it was not the first day, but, fairly early in the class. We were reading, what were we reading? The Elysian Fields, something about the Elysian Fields. And so the professor said, that this was, we talked about it being a place of kind of a utopian kind of place where everything was, the way that you would ideally dream that you'd want to live, in that type of society. And so then she asked the students, well, what would your idea of, the Elysian Fields of your dreams, what would that look like? And so she asked, people said different things. And then somebody asked her, well, what is your idea of what that would be, that utopian place? She looked and she kind of glanced at me and she looked back and she said, a place where there are no niggers. That's what she said. And so I'm sitting there. I'm the only Black in the class because we were one of the first groups to desegregate UT in the first place. So there weren't a lot of Blacks. That's what she said. And I'm thinking, I got to get a grade from this person.
So what
And
did
I actually got a B. But you know what? That was the only B I got in my freshman year. And the rest were A's.
so you said nothing, I'm assuming. Nobody said anything to
I
you.
mean, I was speechless.
Well, I guess I get, and it would been, you couldn't have said anything.
I mean, people looked at me to see how I was reacting, and I felt like I wanted to just disappear. So that spurred my activism on campus even more. Plus, the football team was segregated under Darrell Royal, so we were out picketing for that. So I just found this whole new realm of expression for the anger that I felt.
So, Sherra, I'm back to the banker.
Yes.
You, were there lingering feelings of inferiority, of I don't know? You said I made a connection with this man.
Yeah, I really did. What I haven't talked about is that my anger was never at individual people. So I never looked at, and in the anti-war movement, there were all kinds of people, you know,
Yes.
in all political stripes, all whatever. And so I guess the other part of my upbringing was I was just not, I don't know, I was not taught to judge people really, you know, by the color of their skin, because we were wanting that not to happen to us, right? So I was taught that that's something you don't do. And it just didn't feel right to me anyway. So now the system, I could separate the system from individual people that I had to deal with. And I dealt with them and I related to them based on the way that they related to me. And I was okay with that. And so somehow Chuck Wolf, who is his name, who's the president of that little bank, I think he saw something in me.
I want you to talk for a bit on leading your facility services company and how you did that. You and I had lunch and you were telling me what you were learning about leadership and how you built a team. Can you
Right.
give advice to people who are listening who now are leading teams?
Yes. Yes. So I think one of the first things that I would say is just understand and be honest with yourself about what you're good at and what you're not good at, and realize that you're not going to be good at everything. So you're going to have to, if you want to grow. I mean, some people are, and there's nothing wrong with having a small company, being a solo entrepreneur, and so that works really well for some people. That's not what I wanted. So I knew I had to find good people. So that was the first thing, understanding what I was weak in. I mean, and that was a lot because the only thing that I was really pretty good in, because I really enjoyed it, was the marketing and sales side, because it's people based and, you know, I enjoyed that. But I didn't know the operations. I had never taken finance courses, business finance, but I learned a lot from my banker, as I mentioned. I learned a lot from the courses that I was able to either get a scholarship to or take about these kinds of things. But I just looked for the best people I could get, and I would pay a little bit more than I really could afford to get them. And then I had some really good mentors along the way. And those came in all genders and colors as well.
Okay. So there's something you're doing in interacting with others that's tied to your expertise in marketing. Can you define what that is?
I think what it is that I don't do things I don't believe in. So when I show up to talk to you about something, it's something that I really am committed to. It's something I really get excited about. It's something that I am uh, really banking on being able to deliver to you. And so I think that sincerity comes through. I think the passion comes through. Um, that's kind of what I believe is behind that. I'd have to ask somebody who's on the other side of the desk.
I remember trying to figure out what you did with marketing when we were having those lunches. I remember explicitly trying to explore that with you because
Yeah, yeah.
so many people get stuck on the asking part, and I'm one of them. How did you get past that?
Well, actually, I learned something about that in some of the courses that I was able to get the scholarships through Houston Minority Supply Development Council, and later the Women Business Enterprise Alliance. One of the things that I did learn is the most important part of a sales call is asking for the business. But I learned you ask for the business. And when they say yes, you say thank you and you leave. You don't sit there and talk them out of it.
Okay, so let's take this skill you've got and
Yeah.
let's talk about and you. So let's switch now to your family. You growing up, you watching, you're looking at yourself, you're looking at your family, you're looking at the food. You
Yes.
have to make small changes in yourself. At what point did all that coalesce into a book? And while you're talking, I'm going to do a share screen so people can see what we're talking about.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so how did that become a book?
Well, even though I, really tried on my own to eat in a healthy manner in my 30s, in my 40s, I got a little bit better at it. I mentioned cutting out fried food, donuts. Eventually, I started cutting back on meat and fatty foods, a lot of sugary foods. But even though I was eating in a more healthy manner than anybody that I had seen in my family and most of my friends, in my 50s, I started getting high blood pressure. And so my blood pressure started creeping up, and I'm thinking, what's up with this? I mean, I'm not overweight. I'm fairly active. I eat pretty well by the standards that I held myself to then. I didn't know what I know now. But it happened. And so I had to go on medication. And Jean, I can tell you, I was depressed because I thought I had worked so hard, to do what I had done and to get as far and to make as many changes, and to think that it didn't work, which is how I took it. I felt despondent. I felt like I had failed, in what I was trying to do.
Okay, let me make sure I get this. You were making these small changes in your diet. You were doing what you thought was the right thing to treat your body and create a healthy body. And then all of a sudden, this high blood pressure descends on you.
Yeah.
And that leads you to doubt yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my God, yes. And by that time, there had been more deaths in my family from heart disease. So it was almost like, maybe there's nothing I can do. Maybe there really isn't anything I can do. So I was very lucky to get referred to a Black cardiologist. He happened to be Black, but who was also vegan. And that was because I was seeing a naturopath in addition to just a regular doctor, because I had learned a lot about basically lifestyle medicine. We didn't call it that back then, but just natural medicine using herbs and spices and things like that to help your body heal from things. So um, my naturopath introduced me to him, and Dr. Baxter Montgomery, who's a local cardiologist here in Houston. And I remember going to his office and remember him telling me, look, you can stay on this medication And he says, I will help you try to get off it if you want. He said, but if it's up to you, do you want to get off the medication, or you just want to manage it with the medication? I said, I don't want to just manage it for sure. I don't know what to do at this point. I thought I was doing, what I should do. And so we talked a while, and then he says, well, he says, I have a program, I have a boot camp. I have a garden kitchen here where we make the kind of food that could help you. He said, if you're interested. And so he had asked me a lot of questions. And the first thing I was impressed with is that he talked to me. He wanted to know what I was doing specifically. What are you eating? How are you doing this? He ran all of the tests, did all of that stuff. And basically I was still eating fish. I was still eating cheese. I love cheese. God, I would eat so much cheese and dairy. So I was eating all of those things. He says, well, why don't you try this? He says, I have a 30-day program, kind of a kickstart program. If you'd like to try it just to see, he said, then you can decide, if this is something you think would work for you, would help you, and we'll also monitor your results. So he says, but you're going to have to give up that fish. I did a double take, like, what? And I think he kind of chuckled because I think he'd had that reaction from people before. Because back then we thought, like, fish, oh yeah, that's great. And it is good. Fish is good. But it's not good in too big of quantities, and it's not necessarily the best for health, but it's good. It's better than a lot of things we could eat. So I was thinking, no way. I'm not going to do that. The one thing that made me decide to do this, to really go all the way with plant-based, I had a good friend that I worked with at HISD in that research department, an older woman that I just took on as a second mother. I liked her, and I stayed friends with her until she passed away 3 years ago. And so one day I decided to take her to lunch, and I was still taking the blood pressure meds, right? And I had a problem with lightheadedness from time to time, which I wasn't sure if it was the meds. I wasn't sure what, but so I picked her up at her house, and she lived in Fifth Ward, by the way. And we were going to go to some seafood place in Humble. And we were driving, and all of a sudden I felt like I was going to black out. And the feeling got stronger. And so I didn't know what was happening. I gripped the steering wheel because I didn't know if I could maintain consciousness, quite frankly. And I had my friend, and by this time she was like probably in her early 90s. And I'm thinking, oh my God. So I couldn't show panic. So I just slowly started to change lanes one at a time to get to an off ramp. And I was just praying that I could make it to an off ramp. That's the only thing I wanted to do. So I did. I was able to make it to an off ramp. We got on the feeder road, and probably hadn't gone a block on the feeder road until it just passed. The feeling would pass. It was like it didn't happen. But I was shaking. I was so scared. And so we went ahead. We had lunch. We had a nice lunch. But when I got back home, I'm thinking, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's a wake up call.
That was the moment. I knew if he said no fish, I would try it, because I had to do whatever it took to get off those meds. So basically, long story short, it didn't happen quickly for me because I still didn't know some of the things I didn't know. But over time, I was able to basically get off the meds, and I'm still off of them, 15 years later.
So when you said it didn't happen quickly. Define.
No, it took me time because my numbers would improve, but I couldn't maintain. Like with the kickstart that I did, it improved. Not where I wanted it to be, not where necessarily he wanted it to be, but it was better. So I was encouraged. I knew I was going to keep going. But along the way, I had to learn some things. everybody's a little bit different. And I love fatty foods. So I was eating fatty plant foods in abundance. I had nuts.
What's a fatty plant food? Give an example.
How about almonds? How about walnuts?
Oh, all of my delicious stuff. Yes.
All the, yeah, I loved it. Loved it. Loved it. I mean, never met, you know, a nut that I didn't like, right? So I was eating, I had them in the glove compartment of the car. I had them in my snack bag to take to work. I had them on the kitchen counter. I was getting over 50% of my calories from fat. And that is not good. I don't care what kind of fat it is. so so I had to learn that. But what I also learned, Jean, and I haven't mentioned my journey as a meditator because I started that about 25 years ago as well. But that helped me with the mindfulness part of the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. So the years that I had spent meditating helped me because I really learned to pay attention to my body on a whole different level. So basically, whenever something would happen, like I would all of a sudden I would be doing really well and then I would start looking at it. And I even would keep, like a little journal of kind of like what I ate if my blood pressure spiked. And it was the fat. I was eating way too much fat. So I had to cut back on that. And, I had similar experiences with salt and sugar. I had to figure out how much salt and sugar I could tolerate. But the good news is that my body told me what to do if I would pay attention. And I was reading and researching as well, but my body would say, what you had last night didn't work for you.
Okay, Sherra, so what you're describing is an immense amount of self-discipline. You're recording things. I mean, you're an entrepreneur, businesswoman, right? Who can talk bankers into giving you money and keeping you on when the world is falling apart. So I get all of that. But you also bring a tremendous amount of self-discipline to living your life.
You know what? I'm thankful for that. It's a blessing and a curse because I can be really OCD. And you've heard this before, but I can't remember who told me this the first time, but the only way you fail is if you quit. That's the only way to fail.
Is to quit. Yes.
It's quit. Because it doesn't mean that everything you try is going to work. It just means that if you don't quit, you'll figure it out, or you'll figure out a different way to do it, or a different market to do it in, or a different customer base to try. Or in the case of the health journey, I need to know more about fats. This is really important. And that was a turning point for me. So I also believe, because of my meditation practice, that this saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And so I've just had so many wonderful guides.
I know you have a morning practice. Would you share?
Oh, sure. It's pretty simple. I wake up and I do my morning meditation, which is about 30 minutes, sometimes more. I don't really do less. I mean, that's kind of my goal. And it's just meditation. It's nothing special. It's quiet time without mind chatter. And of course, the mind chatter comes and goes, and that's okay. So I do the meditation, and then I do what I call affirmations. I somehow, I don't know exactly when, I kind of got away from what I consider to be prayer, which was asking for things, because somehow, I started realizing pretty much everything we need, we probably have, but sometimes we don't see it. It doesn't come in the form that we think it should be in, or it looks different, or it feels different, or whatever. So I just started affirming things. I'm thankful for this. I'm grateful for that. Thank you for this. And I do that I have this practice where I do that for my family members. I call people's names, and I think about what they may be going through. And, I just wish for them, and I think basically, um, the universe, the creator, the great spirit, however we want to term that being of light and, um, love. Um, and so it's just affirmation. So and I do that for not just the people in my family. I do that for people that I know, sometimes for people that I don't know really well, if I meet somebody and they're going through something. But I also do it for the planet. I think about what the planet's going through now. And I think about, part of as you know, I'm plant-based totally at this point. But I do that for the animals because one of the things I think that happens with meditation is that your empathy really just expands.
Yeah. So your morning practice is the meditation, the affirmations, which for me, I call what you describe as gratitude. So yeah. So gratitude-based affirmations. And then what?
And then I do yoga.
So you did your book, and you did your book with intention of using it as a lever to have impact on others. Could you explain more about that?
Sure. Again, it goes back to seeing my family suffer and my community suffering. The family came first because that's what I saw growing up. But then the more I got into the space of learning more about healthcare and the healthcare system and alternatives to the healthcare system, and looking at the disparities in communities of color and low income communities, I had to do something with what I'd learned with my experience of reversing my symptoms of heart disease. And that's the number one killer globally. It's the number one killer in the US, and it certainly is the number one killer in our communities. I had to share that. I really wanted to share that. And it wasn't just my experience. I was reading about hundreds of other people, and studies, all kinds of studies, both here in the US, abroad, and then the meta-analyses where they look at clusters of studies and data, and it's just preponderant. And so to me, that was such good news. That was so hopeful that not only do we not have to rely solely on the healthcare system, because we know the healthcare system is struggling. And of course, it's struggling now post-COVID more than ever, but it was struggling 20 years ago. It's just reached a point. I think Forbes magazine had an article recently, it was either Forbes or Times, they both wrote about it, where they call the US health system, they described it as being on life support.
Right.
And a lot of it has to do with staffing issues, but the economic model doesn't work. The insurance, it's all way too expensive. And the expenses are growing, but the outcomes are dwindling. Our life expectancy in the US has started to drop.
Right.
And that's
gone down. Yes. Gone down. Yes.
Gone down. Yeah. So I'm passionate about that, and particularly in minority communities, because we're already under-resourced and overtaxed. We're overtaxed with the burden of performing physical labor for people. And to me, that was something that struck me very starkly with COVID, because our disparities for COVID were so high, but we were out there, we couldn't work from home. I mean, some of us could, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the majority of the people in our communities who are the bus drivers, they're the kitchen cooks. They were exposed to all of this stuff. And they were the people who had the most pre-existing conditions, had the least money for healthcare. And you had people out there fighting to take what healthcare they did have away from them. So how could I not, try to do something? So I was just really passionate about it. So I started with, of course, trying to get the book out. So once the book was published, I hired a PR company. And so I did a lot of podcasts, kind of like what we're doing. Wrote a lot of articles for online magazines, did interviews, I did TV shows, I did all of that stuff as a way to get the word out in general, but also as a way to kind of learn how to message this in a way that people would be receptive. I wanted it to be relatable. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a health specialist. I'm not trained in anything other than just self, taught and interested about it. I started going to conferences prior to COVID, and I met a lot of people that were very helpful. Some of them endorsed my book. That was good. Um, but so basically, I decided to start right in my community. Shape Community Center in Houston is less than 5 minutes from my house, and that's where I kind of grew up as a student activist. The executive director there now is a friend of mine since the U of H days, and I've been a longtime supporter. So it was just natural to do that, and it's in the middle of a food desert, and it's an area with high health disparities. So that's where I decided to start, and I started with Shape, and of course, I knew that Deloitte Parker would say yes because I've known him forever.
Deloitte is the president. Is he president? What's his title?
Executive director of
Executive
Shape.
director of
So
Shape.
I knew he would say yes, but I also knew that Shape is such an institution. Everybody comes to them for everything in the community. And I know that their resources are really stretched. So what I had to learn, and I actually had a mentor who helped me from the nonprofit side, because working in nonprofits and working in for-profit is very different. And I had to learn that lesson. That was kind of tough for me to learn that. But what my mentor, Dr. Bob Randall, who founded Urban Harvest here in Houston many years ago, what he told me, he says, you know what? He says, let me explain to you the position Deloitte's in. Everybody will come to you with an idea. They think you should be doing this, they think you should be doing that. And he says, you have to listen. And a lot of it's very important, but you can't do it all. And so he advised me, he said, because Deloitte had assigned a couple of people to, kind of work with me to structure the program, to talk about it, to kind of envision it. And so Bob says, but I noticed that it was tough, for them to get the time to do it. So Bob says, what you have to do with nonprofits, you can't come and take away resources. You got to bring resources.
There we go.
And it just made perfect sense. I hadn't thought about it, but I really didn't have resources, so to speak. But this is where I'm saying, with the meditation and the mindfulness, and age helps, you realize that you don't have to push everything. Just wait a minute. When the student is ready, the teacher will show up. So I went to Shape to make a pitch to the elders circle that they have about the program. And I did that. And so we were encouraging people to sign up for it if they were interested. And we had a process where we'd interview people, because we wanted to really get people that we thought were really serious about, health, and not only theirs, but community health. But after I made my pitch, it was kind of like what happened with the potential client who followed me out. This person followed me out, and and she says, Sherra, wait a minute. She says, I like what you're talking about. She says, can I talk to you more about that? And I said, sure. Her name is Dola Young. I came to find out later she's a retired attorney who had just gone to get her certification as a certified health coach.
Oh, wow.
And she was a part of the elder circle.
Oh,
so
wow.
I came there, talking to people about joining the group. She wanted to help with the whole initiative. And at that point, she didn't even know what the initiative was, neither did I. So Dola came on board. Then Dr. Bandana Chawla and Dr. Munish Chawla, who also have a foundation called Peaceful Planet Foundation, and they are lifestyle medicine physicians. I knew them through the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and I had met them at a protest down in the medical center. Baylor was using live pigs for experimentation for emergency room residents. And so that's one thing that organization, there are models now that are used for that. You don't need to use live animals, and live animals' anatomies are not analogous enough to human anatomy. But it's just the old school way of doing it, and that's what they were doing. So I met Dr. Bandhanachala, and I started eventually going to some of their vegan potlucks that they would have, and but that was it. So one day I get a call, and it was Dr. Munish Chawla. And Bandana was on the line. And I said, hi, how are you? I think I'd been to a potluck and I'd mentioned something about what I was doing at Shape. And they, said that they really were interested in it. And we talked a little bit, and they said, and they're so humble. They said, we really want to ask you, and we won't be offended, with whatever you tell us, but can we help you with that? And so I said, is that a trick question? I mean, I said, oh my God. I said, oh my God. I said, really? I said, really? They said, yes. And then they started laughing. We all started laughing.
That's beautiful. So what you're saying again, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they came, and oh my God, they're wonderful. I love them so much. And Dola is wonderful. I feel like I've known Dola all my Dola Young, the former retired attorney. I love that woman. It's like I've known her my whole life. And then there's another woman that I met in Fifth Ward, Dr. Jane McCullough, who is an educator, but she's like, they used to tease her about being the mayor of Fifth Ward because she's done so much in the community. She ran her own private school for kids, who needed special attention. She's on the super neighborhood committee. I mean, she's, whatever's happening with Fifth Ward. And they call her Baby Jane because she's born and raised in Fifth Ward. And anyway, long story short, when I was ready to do something at Fifth Ward, I knew who to go to. I went to Baby Jane, Dr. McCullough. And so, so that's our committee now. We have 5 people that are on the committee. There's Dr. McCullough for Fifth Ward, Dr. McCullough. We have Dola Young. We have Joetta Stevenson, who's president of the Super Neighborhood Committee. We've got the chair of the Fifth Ward, what do you call it? Business development, the Chamber of Commerce. She's on it, Miss Dorian, Bridget Dorian. And we've got a longtime resident of Fifth Ward who is a young man, I say a young man, who came up rough in Fifth Ward and has had his own health setbacks and own life setbacks, but is now working for the mayor's office for crime prevention. So he's on it. And we have Carmen Cavesa, who's a climate activist on it, and Hispanic. So now we've got this committee in Fifth Ward that just kind of came together, kind of like Third Ward did, just by asking or just receiving.
Asking and receiving. Okay, so let's wrap up here. I'm sitting here thinking, what's the theme of what we're talking about here? And so what I'd like to invite you to do is just reflect back on this conversation and put yourself in the position of someone who wants to do more with their life, or they have an idea that they want to do more with.
Right.
They learn from you, from your story. I know that. I know you're humble too. I understand that, but then anybody who's listened to this, they're listening to this because they want something from it. What's the takeaways?
So here is what I will say, and I'm not a religious person, but I'm going to use a religious phrase that I know a lot of people are familiar with. And I know you've heard of stepping out on faith.
Yes.
And so that's a religious expression, but it's so true. When you have a passion for something, you have something you think you can contribute, you think you can make a difference, for your own family, for your own life, for your community, for whomever, don't be afraid to try it. Don't be afraid to try it. And it's not necessarily going to be easy. It may not happen quickly, but if it's something you really believe in, and you feel like you have something to offer, then go for it, because the resources will appear. The teachers will appear, the funding, you'll figure it out one way or another. And for me, it was often another. It wasn't necessarily the way I thought initially. There's going to be bumps in the road, but don't give up. And don't be married. So the first thing is step out on faith. Go for it. Go for your dream. Don't sell yourself short. So that's the first one. The second one is understand that if you don't quit, you'll figure it out. The only way you'll fail is if you quit. So that's number 2. And number 3 is that you will inspire so many other people, and those people will end up helping you further whatever it is that you are passionate about. And there's a multiplier effect. So you end up finding yourself in this community of people who are all trying to do something in one way or another, to benefit not just themselves, but others as well. And what a lovely place to be. I mean, money can't buy that. Money can't buy that. And you will do well. You'll make a living. I mean, I'm not saying you'll get rich, but it's, getting rich, it's here today, gone tomorrow, right? Stock market crash, they may be all gone.
Rich, even the definition of rich changes.
Exactly. And I have made some really bad decisions in business. I almost went out of business a couple of times, and I just didn't quit. That's and the resources showed up, the knowledge showed up in the form of some advisor, some counselor, some mentor. And sometimes advice came through the school of hard knocks. You keep doing the same thing, it's not working, you try something else.
There's a fourth I'd like you to add, and it's take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Practice.
For reminding me about the self-care.
Yes.
Well, I really do try to do that, as you know, and because if I'm telling other people to do that, then I have to. But even if nobody knew me, I would still be doing it, because I am grateful for the health that I have. And my way of showing that gratitude is to take care of the health I have. So whatever I can do to do that, I am happy to do it. When I don't feel like, doing my, yoga or my cardio, all I do is just take a moment, close my eyes, and remember all the people in my family that wish they could have done that.
Whoa, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, Sherra. This has been fascinating and informative and inspirational.
Oh, thank you.
And I thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. I mean, you're someone I've always admired, and I was happy to do this with you. And now, I am so grateful that I know you. I always have been, but you're excellent at what you do. I mean, I couldn't have crafted this conversation, the way that you did, and it wouldn't have been what it is. So please keep doing what you do.
Sherra's life history and what she stands for is just remarkable. She ran a multi-million-dollar business as an African-American woman, survived a banking crisis, a painful divorce, and a potential health crisis, and then changed her life to save her life. And now she's doing that for others. What she says at the end summarizes why I wanted her to be on this podcast. Many, many people would have given up with half her obstacles. Somewhere, somehow, she learned to step out in faith. She didn't let her lack of knowledge or limitations to cause her to quit. Instead, she sought out others who could fill in what she didn't know. As she said, and I love this, you haven't failed until you give up. And if you keep going, eventually you will figure it out. Because you can just keep trying something new until you get it. In the process, helpers will appear, but you have to know to look for them. Eventually, synergy sets in, and as she found, others join. I find all of that so inspirational. And so for all of us, and for me too, think of what you would like to accomplish if you had the resources, and then get started based on what you know now. Along the way, don't be too shy or reluctant to ask for help. As she said, when the pupil is ready, the teacher will appear. Thank you for listening.